And we have plenty more lefties in the media disgracing themselves in this segment. Here is veteran PBS host Judy Woodruff warning of misinformation before spreading misinformation and absolute falsehood, which she seems to have made up. This is your taxes at work, folks.
Candidates are facing an historic challenge, an unprecedented scale and variety of disinformation online.
Former President Trump is on the phone with the Prime Minister of Israel, urging him not to cut a deal right now because it's believed that would help the Harris campaign.
Now, not only did she spread that lie last week to damage Trump, but she then blamed Reuters and Axios for leading her astray with their reporting, but neither outlet had reported anything of the sort. Joining me now is journalist and documentary filmmaker Ami Horowitz. Ami, you think such a consequential lie might see someone, I don't know, sacked or at least demoted, but not at PBS.
Yeah, not at PBS, or frankly, I mean, you could do that same video clip with tons of different people in the mainstream media, frankly. Look, I think that this comes back to this really interesting email and this really interesting perspective of Mark Zuckerberg, the head of Meta, when he was talking about the pressure that he faced from the government to push back on misinformation and then disinformation. Now, using these two words. Now, even Rita, if I can say something about what you just did, you made a classic mistake, okay? You are also used the word misinformation when actually Woodruff used the word disinformation. Now, this is a really important point because the word the media has been using is disinformation. Let me explain the difference between the two because they are very, very different and it means a lot. Misinformation is simply giving the wrong information, no more, no less. Just you were wrong. Disinformation is giving false information to push a certain objective, right? Now, that's the difference. The media is, in fact, using the word disinformation. They're saying there's some kind of agenda, some kind of insidious move behind the people let's talk about COVID, who were giving information about COVID. Some was wrong, some were right, by the way, right? And I think that difference means everything. They're pushing this weird agenda. There's a concerted effort to push a certain agenda forward. Okay, I think that's a really important distinction to make because that's how the media has been covering this. I'll give you a little bit of personal information on what happened to me when it came to Facebook. I put out a post. All I did in this post, this is during the COVID, this is at the tail end of COVID. All I did in this post was repost a Johns Hopkins is a well-known university in America, well-respected, a paper that they did talking about how the lockdowns had no real difference in mortality rate, right? It had massive social economic consequences, yet we didn't save lives by doing it. All I did was repost that article, and then, I'm sorry, that study. And then USA Today had an entire article lambasting me in my Facebook post. This is prior to my Facebook post getting demoted. It was actually a quite popular Facebook. And then when this article came out, I also found out then Facebook then demoted me and they quoted USA Today saying, well, they're one of our resources that we use for fact checking. So therefore, we're going to shut down your Facebook account. That's how insidious this entire thing was. And now, look, a little too late when it comes to Zuckerberg giving his mea culpa, but he has. And by the way, I'll point out one last thing. I think Zuckerberg is having some kind of bit of a transformation in terms of politics. I'm not saying he's becoming a Republican, but he's definitely not as aligned with the Democratic Party as we thought he was.
I am not buying it for 1 second, Ami. I think he can just see the changes coming. There's going to be a second Donald Trump term, most likely. And he's been complicit in this censorship, suppression. And I think he's been an enthusiastic facilitator. I don't think he was pressured to do this. And to come out now, years later, and tell us what we already knew was happening, confirming it, no, not buying it for a second. But to me, disinformation, misinformation, I use those words interchangeably because all misinformation is disinformation. It's not just that they make an innocent mistake, because all the innocent mistakes seem to be in the one direction. So it's always these mistakes that are made to push a certain agenda. So to me, the misinformation is almost always also disinformation. Now, I want to play you a little clip of Donald Trump and Virginia Senate candidate Hung Cao. They visited the Vietnamese community in Falls Church, and it was a bit of a love-in.
Vietnamese community loves me and I love them. You know?
Army, long ago, the Democrats took all these different minority communities for granted. They just presumed the bulk of minorities would back them. Those days are over. We've seen that with the Hispanic community, many segments of the Asian community. Is this a change that is going to turn the polls? I don't think there's been enough analysis on how minorities are going to vote in this election.
It's interesting. A second on the Vietnamese community specifically before I talk about the Asian community writ large. But the Vietnamese community happens to have always voted more Republican than the rest of the Asian community, over 50% historically, when in 2016, the Asian community has voted, surprisingly, only 18% voted Republican in 2016. Now, in only 8 years, in only 4 years, in 2020, right, 4 years later, this might have been the most massive turnaround in the history of minorities. So there's been a significant change in the Asian community. I think it's going to make a massive difference. What's interesting is now why, right? Why are we seeing this change? Now, I think there are very specific reasons. First of all, I think they happen to be in California, in New York, where there's extremely high crime rates, particularly the Bay Area. They've seen where the crime is coming from, who is abetting the crime, and who is making excuses for the crime, i.e. the left. I think another important data point is this whole idea of the hatred of the left and its hatred of success. The Asian community is a symbol of success in our country. They are one of the highest earners in our country. They are a successful minority. I think they don't like being demonized for their success, particularly when it comes to college admissions and even high school admissions. Right, there has been a concerted effort to demote Asians from successful placement in successful high schools, elementary schools, and certainly colleges. Famously, Harvard has specifically tried to stop Asians from coming in. They are the only minority with a negative coefficient at Harvard. In other words, the only minority that being a minority has actually harmed them, not helped them, outside the Jewish community. And this has not gone unnoticed.
Absolutely. And they are damaged. I think the Asian community has learned these DEI policies that are supposed to help minorities actually damage them. And as you mentioned with Harvard and some of these Ivy League colleges, for an Asian student to gain admission, they have to do so much better than just about every other demographic. Hispanic students, Black students, even the white students, they are discriminated against that much because they're studious, they study, and they record good results. And of course, you've got to be punished for that. Now, before you go, Democrat Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib shared this clip of Jon Stewart criticising the DNC for not having Palestinian voices at the event. Have a look at the clip.
They had Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, gay Americans, Jewish Americans, Palestinian Well, to be fair, it was only 4 nights, 8 hours a night. But really, it's best not to think about the consequences of our actions over there.
Army, what's your response to that?
Yeah, that is highly disappointing. Obviously, Jon Stewart, a Democratic supporter, but also a prominent Jewish person who has supported Israel in the past. The consequences of what we're doing there, Rita, yeah, that's highly disturbing. The idea that the consequence of what we're doing there, Rita, is helping Israel defend itself from a terrorist regime. That's the consequences of what we're doing there. For him to spin that as a negative is really disturbing, upsetting. Don't like to see that. And frankly, I think if Rashida Tlaib is amplifying your voice, I think you have to look in the mirror and say, maybe I'm going down the wrong road here.
That is very good advice there. If you're on the same page as her and the rest of the squad, you need to reassess your life choices. Ami Horowitz, thank you so much for your time this evening.